Shri Maharaj Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Goswami Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai, Shri Prabhupada Paramahansa Parivrajaka Stotara Shata Shri Maharaj Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Goswami Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. Jayam Vishnupada Paramahansa Parivrajaka Stotara Sata Shri Maharaj Divine Grace Srila Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Thakur Maharaj Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai, Ananta Koti Vaishnava Vrinda Ki Jai, ISKCON Founder Acharya Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai, Namacharya Srila Haridas Thakur Ki Jai, Prem Ji Ho Sri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Sri Advaita Gadadhar Shivasadi Gaur Bhakta Vrinda Ki Jai, Shri Radha Krishna Gopinath Shamakunda Radha Kunda Ki Jai, Govardhana Ki Jai, Shri Vrindavan Dham Ki Jai, Shri Navadvip Dham Ki Jai, Shri Mayapur Dham Ki Jai, Shri Jagannath Puri Dham Ki Jai, Shri Radha Govardhana Dhari Ki Jai, Shri Radha Giridhari Ki Jai, Shri Gauritai Ki Jai, Shri Radha Krishna Balarama Ki Jai, Shri Giridhari Ki Jai, Shamaveda Bhakta Vrinda Ki Jai, all glories to the assembled devotees, 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 all glories to Shri Guru and Shri Gauranga Narayanam Namaskritam, Dharam Chaivam Narotamam Devim Saraswatim Vyasam Tathojaya Mudiraya Nastaprayesho Abhadresho Nityam Bhagavata Sevaya Bhagavati Utamashloke Bhakti Ravati Naishtiki. I think there's a shloka from the Caitanya Caritamrita on the board. Maybe someone else can read it because I don't have the book here. Just the English. One of you gentlemen can read it to start off. Go ahead.
Maybe it's on the other side of the board. That's upside down. You got verse? Oh, sorry.
Before we start, I just want to inform everyone you probably already know that this event, this weekend event, this long weekend event, was organized by 20-year-old Premanjali and her dedicated assistants, namely Vrindavan and Kirtana. So read the verse.
I'll just read it out loud. This is from the Madhya-lila, chapter 15, verse 46, translation. Sri Caitanya Mahaprabhu requested Srivas Thakur, perform congregational chanting daily and be assured that I shall also dance in your presence. You will be able to see this dancing, but not others.
So this verse indicates the importance of Harinama Sankirtan, and that's been a very important feature of the Krishna consciousness movement since the very beginning. I was with a group that went to London, England, and for a little while, because we chanted the Hare Krishna mantra, it became a popular slogan. And there was a football game, soccer game, I think they call it football, in Manchester, and during the break, I was told, I wasn't there, I don't go to football games, but I was told that this speaker system played the Hare Krishna mantra, played a number of the records that were popular then, but the whole stand, about 50,000 people in the audience chanted along because there was only 3 words they could chant very easily. So anyway, it was a very grand occasion. And there was another instance in Moscow at the Moscow Olympic Stadium when there were 35,000 people chanting the Hare Krishna mantra. And the devotees were on a stage in that stadium. It was organized by Hare Krishna Maharaj and no, Hare Krishna Prabhu now. Anyways, it was a big event, and it was on a stage, and there's been a custom to always have chanters on a stage. I think Indradutta Swami's kirtans are usually on a stage or a raised platform, and we don't have a raised platform today, but I mean that's sort of a raised platform for you to sit on in the audience. It's a little bit raised. But stages have been always very an important part of the Krishna consciousness movement. Shakespeare said that stage, all the world is a stage. It was kind of like a disguised Mayavadi statement. All the world's a stage, all the men and women have their entrances and exits. And then that was in As You Like It, I think, the play. And then there was the play Hamlet, in which he brought some players in and while this drama was being enacted, according to the story, he was keeping his eye on his uncle, who he thought had murdered his father so that he could gain the kingdom and his queen. So he said that the play is the thing that will capture the conscience of the king. Anyway, that was all staged, and just shows how rotten things were in Denmark in those days. I want to talk a little bit about what it was like being a Hare Krishna rock star, just for a little while in the late 1960s and the early 1970s. Most of the time, we were on television, actually, and most of the time there was a stage performance, including the times that we were on television. There was a program that was very popular in England called Top of the Pops, and we appeared on it several times. As I remember, there was one devotee who said we would refuse to go on to be a part of this program. It was a live broadcast because there were some very suggestive girls dancing behind all the pop groups that played, but one of our members told the director that we would refuse to participate in this event if these girls were going to be on stage. We have our own dancers. And so the director became very angry and sweaty and livid, actually, and it was like the end of his career. If we didn't show up, it would ruin the entire program. So he more or less had to concede. And then we did our number with our own dancers, and it was quite a successful thing. Anyway, there was an agent called, I think it was called the Red Bus Company, that set up our performances all over the land of England, and in part in Europe. We had engagements in Germany and Netherlands and France, and even in Sweden. In Sweden, there was an event called the Festival of the Midnight Sun, supposedly arranged and paid for by a Mexican, a very wealthy Mexican man. And he arranged to fly about 12 of the most popular groups, including ourselves, to a place called Linköping, Sweden. Linköping is on the southern, we first flew to Stockholm and then took a bus down to Linköping. It's on the southern tip. Linköping is on the southern tip of Sweden. And because it was the 21st of June, it was the Festival of the Midnight Sun, because that's the summer solstice. And it was light. I remember riding in a bus at 1 a.m. and the sun was blazing down. It was truly the midnight sun, because it's so far north. It's just unbelievable. So anyway, they erected a big platform, kind of a stage. It was about maybe 15 or 20 meters above the ground. And we didn't come on till 11 o'clock, and it was blazing hot. The sun was out, and there were no clouds in the sky. And at that time, to achieve the vibrato effect, the speakers the speaker containers would have rotating speakers inside them. They would spin around and create a vibrato effect. So we didn't know much about this, but we only knew about 3 words, and our contract was that we had to perform for about half an hour, and it was a 3-minute thing. We only knew one song, the Hare Krishna mantra. So to make the show successful, there were about maybe 16 of us all together, and we started dancing. And the dancing disturbed these speakers. They call them Leslie speakers. And they started banging against the sides of the containers, and they made a sound like an explosion. And the people in the audience thought that was part of the performance, that there would be several explosions throughout the whole dance. So they enjoyed it. Anyway, that was the Festival of the Midnight Sun, and then driving back, and we this person who put on the event was apparently very wealthy. He was able to fly us all up there from an airport called Luton, which is near London, the north of London, and then we took buses from Stockholm to Linköping and back to Stockholm, and we were put up in a hotel, and it was a very expensive event to put on, but it was the Festival of the Midnight Sun, and it was deemed fairly successful. It was written up in some of the rock and roll magazines. So for several months after the record, it was a 45 recording, became popular, this company arranged for us to perform in various places, in various cities all around the country and in Europe. And when Prabhupada first came to London, which was in September the 11th of 1969, I believe is the exact date, And he heard about this record, but he wasn't sure. And so he asked some of the devotees, what is this all about? Or words to that effect. And we told him that we had made a recording and it was popular. And he said, well, how popular? And someone said that it sold 70,000 copies yesterday. And then Prabhupada opened his eyes very wide and said, oh, very big business. Anyway, that went on for several days. Not that at that level. I think 70, it was quite a popular thing. And there were times when devotees were going up and down in the escalators on the underground, the subways of London, and we would see photographs of ourselves. The company that put out the record, Recording Apple, put a lot of energy and money into it. So they had pictures of us in the undergrounds, and we'd see pictures of ourselves as we were going up and down the escalators, and it was like being a rock star, you know, for a short period of time. And when we would go up and down in a procession up and down Oxford Street, which we did every day, 7 days a week, sometimes people would come up to us and they would say, oh, you're famous, we saw you on television, please sign your autograph. And our method was of autograph signing was to say, chant Hare Krishna and your life will be sublime. And we, as a matter of duty, we had to put our names on the bottom. But everywhere we went, people asked for autographs. Even in petrol stations on the way up north, we had engagements in places like Liverpool and Sunderland and all over the country. The petrol station attendants would ask for autographs. Oh, it's for my daughter or my son, and you know, likely story. Anyway, that was what part of being a rock star was. We realized that it was actually a very big business. It wasn't just nice music. It was, you know, it was a business. We got paid. We had to do it actually because the temple in Berry Place at that time was being renovated. It was originally the Trinitarian Bible Society on Berry Place, and it had to be radically renovated. So we converted it into a temple, a kitchen, and living quarters. And these engagements supplied enough money for us to renovate the temple. And so we'd get maybe 200, 300, 400 pounds, depending on where it was and who was on the bill. Sometimes they were other famous rock and roll stars. We didn't even know who they were. We were kind of out of the scene. But anyway, that's what it was like. Many venues, and always there was a stage performance. It was always on stage. And one of the interesting events took place at a place called the Cougar Club. The Cougar Club was located in Bremen, which is in northern Germany. And when this was all put on, all organized by the agents, the Red Bus Company. And when we first got there, it looked kind of like very dusty and dirty, and it was a kind of a movie theater converted. And the lady who was in charge came out to greet us, and she was wearing a kind of a night dress, not a nightgown, night dress. And we thought, well, this is, you know, doesn't look like a very good, auspicious occasion. So we thought to ask her if she could pay us money before we even performed. And she didn't speak much English, and we didn't speak much German, but we managed to understand her saying that we'll give you the money after you perform. And we were supposed to perform for something like 1 hour or 2 hours, and we only knew one song. So at the end of each Maha Mantra, which ended with a gong, the audience just demanded that we do it again. They started saying in German, I think the word was Zukabe, and they were chanting Zukabe, 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 like that, and I think it means encore. And we didn't know, there was only one of us that knew what the word meant and knew any German, so we did it again. And we did it about 3 or 4 times, and each time we found out that most of the people in the audience were 16, 17, and 18 years old. And the Cougar Club had become sort of a famous venue for the teenagers of that city. And they had come to that place because we were the famous rock stars, and they wanted to see what they had heard on the radio, the Hare Krishna mantra. So then after about 4 times, we decided this stage performance is kind of like not so good. And so we all went down into the audience, got off the stage, jumped down into the audience. There were about 10 of us. And they just surrounded us and demanded that we start again. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare. And I remember we were chanting for so long, and it was so difficult to be heard over the throng. It was there were about 2,000 people there. There was blood on my hands. I was playing the mridanga on my dhoti, and there was blood all over the mridanga, and it went on, and we thought, how are we going to ever get out of here? They just wouldn't stop. They were like stormtroopers or something, really insisting. So finally, we got a plan. Our plan was to play there was one turntable backstage, and we knew about it, and we had one record. So we thought, well, we'll go backstage, we'll close the curtains, and we'll play this over the loudspeakers. And lo and behold, it worked. We actually did it. And we were peeking out through the curtains, and they were chanting along with the record, because they heard it several times. When we had to perform in place, I remember the name of the place. It was in Amsterdam. And they wanted us to perform on stage. So and Prabhupada went with us. We were all flown to Amsterdam, about 12 devotees and Prabhupada, and the idea was to chant the Hare Krishna mantra, just that one song. They would be happy with that. And so they put us up in a sort of basement quarters with no windows and concrete floors and no chairs and little plinths to sit on, made of concrete. And Prabhupada was unhappy with the whole setup. And then when it came time to perform, they brought out this big, sort of their version of a Vyasa song, which was more like a throne of Lord Shiva or something. And they put dry ice under it so that smoke would come up out of the outside of steam. So that it would look like Prabhupada was sitting on a cloud. That was their idea. Anyway, we managed to get them to do away with the dry ice and told them that wasn't really proper. And then we sang the Hare Krishna mantra. So that used to happen on a weekly basis almost. So getting back to England, we had several engagements, and that provided money for the renovation of Variplace Temple in cities all over the country. It was very difficult because sometimes the audience was in a nightclub and they were drinking and like this, and even Prabhupada said at one point that we shouldn't go to venues where they were drinking wine and liquor and that sort of thing, and he was very dismissive of it. But anyway, we carried on, and Prabhupada had come to England on the 11th of September 1969, just when this recording was being popular, and he conducted his own kirtans at Bhaktivedanta Manor in the theater. It had a theater room, and he would play the gong, and there was one devotee named Rebhatinanda, who was Govardhana Swami, who was leading the kirtan, playing mridanga. And at the end of the kirtan, which went on for about half an hour or so, and Prabhupada was playing gong all the time. This gong, beautiful gong. I don't know where he got it. And at the end of the prayer, the Premadwani prayers, when he was saying Om Vishnu Pad Paramahansa Parivrajagacharya Stotara Sata Shri Shrimad, His Divine Grace Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati, at the end of the prayers, he said, "And all glories to Rebhatinanda Swami." And we were really shocked. He was just one of us. But he was leading the kirtan, and Prabhupada was glorifying kirtan. That's his way of saying that kirtan was probably the most important thing we should ever do. So this went on for some time, and Prabhupada was, on the whole, quite pleased with what we did. There was a time in India when I think it was after the London event, about 1971, Prabhupada asked us, the devotees, to stop their Harinams. And I'm going to read a little passage here from Giriraj's most recent publication called I'll Build You a Temple. And this is what he wrote. I think I can read it. I have my glasses on. Practically from the time I had joined, this is Giriraj's voice, our lives had revolved around Sankirtan, and at no time, nowhere, had that been more true than during that period in Bombay, he's talking about that period being about 1971, 1972, then suddenly one day, Prabhupada told us, quote, "No more street Sankirtan. In India, if we chant on the streets, people will think that we are beggars," end quote. We were shocked, stunned, and dismayed. We had been taught that this was the Sankirtan movement. Quote, by 1970, Tamal Krishna remembered, quote, active street Sankirtan, chanting Hare Krishna on the streets and distributing Back to Godhead magazines had been going on for a year or a year and a half. And when we arrived in India that year, we applied the same formula. We chanted Hare Krishna on the streets. But some people ridiculed us. And then, and there were newspaper articles in the same mood. When Prabhupada heard about this, and he heard that people were throwing coins at us, he told us to immediately stop doing daily street kirtans because people were taking it cheaply. Prabhupada was willing to completely adjust the fundamental strategy of street chanting if it didn't have the desired effect. Srila Prabhupada explained that we must approach the higher sections of society with his books and especially through life membership. So that persisted for about maybe a year or two, but it was very significant because it was the beginning of a life membership program, which ended up to be very successful. But nowadays, going on the street and chanting Hare Krishna in most countries is very popular. Even in India, whenever the Kirtan party chants in one of the Indian cities, people flock to it and gather by the hundreds or thousands even to see it. There was a time, I think it was in 1974 in San Francisco, when the San Francisco Ballet Company, which is the biggest ballet company in the world, started in Portland, Oregon. It was in 1974, they were on the verge of bankruptcy. This I read in a book. So they took to the streets. The ballet company took to the streets. They took to the streets of San Francisco, and on Market Street, throughout the several months, people were treated to ballet in the streets of San Francisco, and it turned out that they became solvent again through this strategy of going on the street. And we don't know, but we think, we surmise, we conjecture, we speculate that maybe they got the idea of going on the streets from the Hare Krishnas, which were very popular on the streets of San Francisco at that time. I remember going on Market Street and standing on the street corners of Market and Grant Street, where the cable cars come and turn around. And we were very popular. It was always very popular to go on street Sankirtan. And that was the basis of the Hare Krishna movement. Everybody knew that, and everybody relied on those things because they were very popular. Sometimes we would just stand in one place and do Harinams, and people were very happy with that. Yeah. So in India we stopped Sankirtan for a while, and then started up again. And nowadays it's popular everywhere. There was a time in Russia, and it's particularly in Moscow, when people were, the government was so repressive that we couldn't go in public anywhere and do anything. And then gradually the atmosphere kind of softened and got a little more favorable, and devotees took to the main streets of Moscow and started chanting, and we became very popular through that chanting. I remember when I first arrived in Moscow, they had a coup d'etat sort of thing, and Gorbachev was the leader of Glasnost, and they were sort of throwing out the Bolshevik or communist regime. And then the communists had a counter-revolution. They wanted to take back over. And so what happened was people died in the conflict when they tried to take over, when the communists tried to take over again. And we had a Rath Yatra planned on the same day they were having a funeral in Moscow for the 2 people who died, and therefore we postponed the whole thing for 2 weeks. But it was quite an interesting thing to fly into a revolution. It was the first time I'd ever been to Moscow, and we went right from the airport to Red Square, and the devotees were being patted on the back by people holding a bottle of vodka in one hand and patting us with the other hand. But it was quite an event. And then we went directly to what they call the White House, which is like the capital of the capital in Moscow. And Gorbachev was released. He had been held captive, and he had escaped intentionally, and he had been returned from the Crimea in southern Russia. And he was in the building, and it was a very significant moment in history because it was the virtual end of communism, in Russia. And it was like the last final nail on the coffin when this counter coup failed. And as we went to the White House, we learned that there were about 5,000 people from different media, from different countries, trying to get into that building, and they would only let one person in with CNN. So anyway, just to make a long story short, we did have the Rath Yatra a couple of weeks later in what's now called Gorky Park, or what was then called Gorky Park. Gorky was the city where they manufactured a lot of weaponry, and so I think they named Gorky Park after that. And the devotees in America were watching this on their television screens. Some of them had big television screens, like 1.5 meters long and maybe 1.5 meters high, 2 or 3 meters long, and they saw the devotees because it was a big event. And the cable news network published it, and they asked one of the devotees, how many devotees do you have in Russia? And the person said, oh, about 10,000, which was pretty exaggerated at the time. Anyway, that was a big event, and it brought some people to tears to see that it was kind of an historical event. It was the end of communism, and it was the Hare Krishnas were the leaders of the underground while it was underground. So that all took place. So Kirtan was very famous, and it was always on a stage, always enacted. And there, at one point, Prabhupada wanted what he called the World Sankirtan Party to take place. He talked about this in London. I searched for him talking about the World Sankirtan Party, and there was almost nothing about it. But devotees remember him talking extensively about the World Sankirtan Party. And the concept was to take 10 or so really advanced kirtaniers on a world tour, on a stage, and they would perform on stage, like Govardhana's group. And that was his strategy, to take this. He talked about this for months, literally. And he even named the people who would be part of it. And he was very keen to see that this would happen. But then eventually, because so many kirtan parties were going on the streets of major cities, he decided against it. And he said it would achieve the same effect. So going on the street from the very beginning was kind of like state-of-the-art public relations. People do it now. There was a San Francisco ballet, these people from the Vegan Society, they go on the streets, even in Murwillumbah. So it's a very popular thing, and it was actually started 500 years ago, because Lord Caitanya did this. He went on the streets of Navadvip and all over England, all over India, rather. And Prabhupada knew that this was the way to get recognition. So these events that are put on, in a sense, what Indradumna Swami is doing is like a perfection of the World Sankirtan Party that Prabhupada talked about. He's doing kirtans in stages in Australia, in New Zealand, in the United States, and all over the world. And I had the good fortune to be a part of one of the tours. And once when I was, it was kind of a rainy day, so the street sankirtans that were promoting the events wouldn't take place. And it was somewhere in Poland, on the northern coast of Poland. And the devotees had rented a theater, a former movie theater. I mean, it was a movie theater. And the person sitting next to me, once the kirtan had begun, just got up spontaneously, ran to the stage and started dancing with the devotees. So Poland is a very popular place for kirtan. And that incident stuck very much in my mind. And we used to sleep in gymnasiums and different places around Poland when we performed in places like Gdynia and Gdansk and this and that. So this is like the perfection, as I was saying in one of the classes that I gave during that time of the kirtan parties, that this is a perfection of the World Sankirtan Party. This is what Prabhupada wanted. He wanted kirtan to be performed on stage through different countries and for people to like it. You may have known that there's a devotee named Krishnadas. He's not a devotee of ISKCON, but he's some kind of devotee. Or maybe he's initiated by a Mayavadi sannyasi. And there was a 2-page article in Time magazine about him. And the word kirtan appeared several times that he does this. And he performs on a stage. He's got very nicely dressed people. And he kind of does what Indradyumna Maharaj is doing. He has some Western instruments and they dress very fancily. But unfortunately, the Hare Krishna wasn't mentioned in that long article. And we were the founders of bringing Hare Krishna to the world. And the great advantages of the kirtan parties that Indradyumna has undertaken are not recognized by the media, unfortunately. But that will happen, we hope, in the future. So that's all I have to say about this is a very great event, and we're promoting the Hare Krishna mantra. It's the essence of the Hare Krishna movement. And if we're not elevated on the stage, we're elevating the spectators who are sitting on an elevated platform. And even if we spill out onto the grass, we're there because we want to hear the essence of the Hare Krishna mantra. So any comments or questions or anything to be said by anyone listening?
I have to borrow your mic, it's concentrated.
If you stand, that's all. I think everyone will hear you, even if we don't have a microphone. Go ahead.
Maharaj, we're so grateful.
Stand, please. We are so grateful. I heard that.
We're so grateful to you and all the pioneers of the Krishna consciousness movement. One of the strokes of genius was deciding to go and meet the Beatles and meeting George Harrison and cutting the record. Can you take us through the bold thinking that led you to imagine that you could do that?
Well, I think everyone heard his question. What led to it was that we were invited actually, to perform the Hare Krishna mantra as a recording by the Beatles, by George Harrison. And we went into recording studios to do this. And we went into the EMI studio. We went into a studio called Trident Studio on St. Anne's Alley. They call it St. Anne's Alley in England. St. Anne's Alley. That's what led to it. We were invited. And we had practiced with Jamuna singing the Brahma Samhita prayers, Govindamari Purusham, in the arts lab. And that became what was one of our recordings. But that's what led to it. We were invited. It wasn't our idea, but it was their idea. And sometimes George Harrison would come up with his guitar to the Berry Place Temple and rehearse with us before we recorded. So that's what led to it, anyway. It was a very significant event. And there was a time when I was walking down the street in a place called Hackney, which is in East London. It's a kind of like Cockney people speaking area, kind of considered a working class area, part of the Great Unwashed, as they call them in England, the working class people, the Great Unwashed. And so it was a very hot summer day, and I heard, and there was a car driving past me with a top down, a convertible, and the Hare Krishna mantra was playing on his radio. And I heard the announcer say at the end of the song, I was right at the very end, and the car was whizzing past, that was a bunch of bald-headed Americans. So to see our own picture and to hear ourselves on the radio and to give autographs was something that we should have taken advantage of, I suppose, but we didn't. Anything else? Stand, please, and speak out. Be stentorian.
Maharaj, if it hadn't been for you, we might not have got 22nd Avenue. This was your deciding to help Swamiji at the time. Could you take us through what possessed you to do that? What made you go, I must help this gentleman?
What possessed me to get... Well, I wasn't really possessed, and I think it would have, even if I hadn't been alive at that time, someone else would have done it. But what concerned me was that this loft in the Bowery where Prabhupada was preaching from was not a very salubrious location. There were a lot of drunks there, and so I decided that he needed a better place to preach in. And the better place turned out to be 26 2nd Avenue. It was advertised in the Village Voice, and I went to a newsstand it was the first place the Village Voice came out, when it came out. And I made a phone call, and that was then the agent for 26th Avenue came to meet us, and he agreed. That was it. But like I said, it could have been anybody who was there at the time. Any others? Any other comments? Or
Maharaj, I've just been reading Shamasundara,
Mhm.
Chasing the White Rhino. Prabhupada. He mentioned that George Harrison's Bangladesh album was #1, and so there were many incidences where other people popularised the Hare Krishna mantra. Can you say something about the fact that they were influenced by the early devotees and the initial
Who was influenced by? You mean musicians?
musicians?
A lot of people were influenced. As I said before, that guy named Krishnadas, I'm almost positive he was influenced by hearing Harinam devotees chanting, or maybe even seeing them. As far as how great our influence is, that's kind of debatable. There was a time when one of the devotees said to Prabhupada, "There's less crime this year in the United States than ever before. Is that due to the Hare Krishna presence?" And Prabhupada paused, and he didn't answer immediately, and finally he said, "Yes, we will take credit for that," in kind of a matter-of-fact tone. So he kind of indicated that we weren't going to change the whole world necessarily by Harinam, but we have to do our best. And another time he was saying that the face of the world would change. So these are kind of debatable points, whether the face of the world is going to change or not. But there is a prediction in one of the Puranas, I think it's the Bhavishya Purana, and there's another Purana, where it said that for a period of about 10,000 years in Kali Yuga, there would be a great piety would reign. And some people even said that's already started. But that's debatable too. Because the actual date, the starting time, wasn't actually given. And we're talking about a 432,000 year period, so we don't know when. I mean, it's a pretty big range. Yes?
Could you say something about the mantra rock dance, Maharaj?
The mantra rock dance. Well, he asked me if I could say anything about the mantra rock dance. Well, that took place on a stage too. It was in a ballroom, and Prabhupada was there. And Allen Ginsberg, the poet, then poet, I think he's still alive, I don't know. Anyway, he led the kirtan because Prabhupada thought that if he did, it would be kind of pretentious, or I don't know what his reasoning was, but he asked Allen Ginsberg to lead it, and he did it, and there were about 1,500 people in the audience, mostly young people, sort of, in outlandish clothes, sort of alternative types. And they were swaying, and they joined in chanting. It was a very wonderful event. And at the end of it, there was one devotee who started dancing with a lady under the strobe lights, a girl. And at the end of it, the next day, Prabhupada said, "This is no place for a brahmachari." and that devotee left the movement after that. I don't want to mention his name, but that happened. So it was very good on the whole, but there was an element of it that was not so good. But on the whole, it was very, and there was a very strong division between people who thought that the people on the West Coast were doing good things. They were the liberals, and there were the conservatives on the East Coast, the New York people who thought that consorting with hippies was the wrong strategy. And so a bit of a debate ensued between left and right wings. But the left wing, I think, kind of won out, if there's such a thing. Yes, Stan, please. I just want everyone to hear what you say.
Maharaj, these left and right wings still persist today. Perhaps it's even more of a tug of war, culture wars or so. Any guidance for us as people who might, be swayed by one side or the other, how to have a balanced approach?
Well, as far as, the left wings and right wings, I think we can kind of regard it as diversity gone amok. I mean, Prabhupada said that we should strive for unity and diversity, or diversity and unity. But in almost every organization, when it becomes institutionalized fully or partially, there's going to be conservatives and liberals. But that term, left and right wing, usually applies to politics. And Prabhupada did say that that's something we should avoid. We shouldn't get political, even though he did encourage people who ran for office. But at this time at least, he kind of discouraged us from becoming politically involved. And there was a time when someone asked him that if you see a drowning man, should you go and save him? Or should you just ignore it? And there was a very instructive response. This was in, I don't know if it was in person or in a letter, but Prabhupada wrote in great detail that we don't really want to interfere with a person's karma. Maybe it was that person's karma that he or she died at that time. But and I asked Prabhupada a similar question in my first, in the first time I was in the audience of one of his classes. If you see a fight between two people and one person is younger and gaining advantage over an older person, should you just ignore it and walk on, or should you interfere? And he didn't answer for a long time. And he kind of knew that I was a bit of a sentimentalist. And finally, he did say that yes, you should interfere. But in the conversation or the letter that he wrote to someone about the drowning man, he said that sometimes we have to obey popular sentiment. I don't know if those are exact words, but that was pretty much, it was sentiment. And when the temple opened in Bombay, there was also a left and right division. There were people who said that we should have our own people do the Brahminical sort of ceremony for opening the temple. And there were other people that said that, well, we should have South Indian Brahmins do it, because the people of Bombay want to see that. And the argument against it was, well, if they see white people doing this, they will be very impressed that they've been converted. So anyway, this argument went on for some time, and I was in India at this time, and the South Indian Brahmins won out. They had about a 7-day sort of ceremony for the opening of that temple, and it was a very successful opening. Just one other last story. I'm going over time, but on my first visit to India, the very first time I went there, I think it was about 1974. I didn't know the exact time, but I was walking with another devotee across the Juhu land, and a car was coming up. This was after dark, and so the car was coming up behind us. I could tell it was a car coming up behind us because of its lights. And all the devotees there were a number of devotees on the land at the time. They started running away, scattering, like running away from the car. And I said to the devotee I was walking with, what are they afraid of? And then the devotee pointed out that's what they're afraid of. And what he pointed to was what was left of the temple that had been demolished by the former owner. And there was nothing but piles of rubble on metal frames. And the story is that a man who was very favorable, was a construction engineer, came to the site, and there's various stories about what happened, why this happened. One of the stories is that a devotee named Madhya-lila stood with, the only thing that remained after this demolition was a little wooden house that housed Radha Rasa Bihari. And the story is that she stood with her back to them and said, if you're going to attack, then you'll have to kill me first. And that they at that point backed away. All these gundas that were paid off, they backed away. And the other story is that an urgent call had been put by one of our life members to the municipality, and an order came for the so-called paid gundas to withdraw, and then they withdrew. But that actually happened. And then the construction men, the law of the municipality was that if the structure that was demolished could be reinstated or rebuilt in 10 days, then they would be the legal landholders. And he sat there and didn't sleep in a chair, this man, for nearly a week until it was restructured, re-erected. That's the story. And he had a rifle, and two of his sons had pistols that were by his side, and they said if anybody dares to interfere, they'll be killed. So that's the story, and that's in that book that I would recommend everyone read. I don't know if it's called I Will Build You a Temple. It's Giri Raj's latest publication. Any other comments or questions?
Just a message from the kitchen.
Stand, please. Message from the kitchen.
Message from the kitchen. breakfast is running late, so if you want to go a bit longer, you can.
Okay, well, maybe you can meditate on some questions or, things you want me to talk about. Yes? I'm sorry.
What if we're shy and we don't want to go out on the street and chant Hare Krishna?
What if we're shy and we don't want to do it? I came across one recording of a conversation that Prabhupada had. I don't know what year it was. It was probably 1973 or 1974 when he said, you may, and he was talking about in the temple, you may not feel like dancing. You may have to force yourself to do it. But if you force yourself to do it and you start dancing, you'll like it. I mean, that's not the exact wording, but that's what he intoned. That you may not want to dance, but you force yourself to do it, and devotees afterwards repeated what he had said, that you do it anyway, and you'll feel very happy. Yes?
It seems a contradiction because before you were saying that Prabhupada wanted to stop the Harinams because of people's way they were treating the devotees. But in other places in the Caitanya Caritamrita, I've heard it said that the Sankirtan movement should go on regardless of time, place or circumstance. So it does seem like somewhat of a contradiction in that.
Well, yeah, did you hear his question? He said, the Prabhupada has written that realization is knowing how to preach in a particular time, in a particular place, and to a particular audience, time, place, and circumstance. So that was a time in India when we first got there, maybe 1970, 1971, 72, when the most realized thing was to stop for a while anyway, chanting on the street, because people thought we were beggars. And when he heard that people were throwing things at us, especially coins, that there's a custom for buskers or people that are chanting out on the sidewalk or streets to get money, and that's and this reminds me of another incident that actually took place. There was a famous violinist who started playing his violin down in the subway. This actually happened in Washington, D.C. And at the end of the day, he would be lucky to get maybe $7 or $8 in his busking little receptacle. And the same person playing the same song performed in the same city in a auditorium. And at the end of the day, they took in between $3,000 and $6,000. So it just goes to show that according to the time and the place and the circumstance and the audience, you have to act accordingly. And so his acting accordingly was to be on stage and to get thousands of dollars or whatever his cut was. But when he went down into the subway, when he was playing the same song underground, he got nothing, hardly. So Prabhupada says in one part of one of his books that realization is knowing what to say and what to do according to the particular circumstances. That's realization. So that occurred for some time. And then Kirtan, as people know here in Australia and everywhere else in the world, is very active. Harinama. People want to see the devotees. It's in one way they can even know that we exist. Otherwise they hardly know that we exist. But when they see us out amongst them, they're very happy. Yeah, you're still alive and still kicking. Yes. Stand, please. I hate to keep asking you to do this, but I know we don't have a microphone, and I think what you say is very important.
When you were preparing to come to the UK, you spent a little time in Montreal with Srila Prabhupada being prepared. Could you share with us some of the ways in which Srila Prabhupada guided and prepared you for that amazing trip?
That's an interesting question, or an interesting point. A few of us, about 6 devotees, 6 adults and 1 baby child, went up to Prabhupada's room in Montreal and asked him if we're... By the way, Prabhupada told the devotees, he said that I sent 6 householders to London, and actually it wasn't exactly correct because we wanted to go, and then he approved of it. He didn't exactly send us there. Anyway, we asked him, did he have any special instructions for how to preach in England? Because we were all Americans. And then he said, well, he thought for a long time, and then he said, well, maybe you should do dramas. After all, it's the land of Shakespeare. And then after he paused for a while, and then he told us the story about a movie he saw, a movie in which Charlie, and it exists, I don't know where or when, but it's that there was a ballroom dance going on. And one of the dancers, I think it was Charlie Chaplin, started tearing his pantaloons down so that his backside was exposed. And all the other dancers thought that this was really cool. And it was the fashion of the day. And they started doing it. And they started ripping their pants down. They'd go into the local men's room and do exactly, they would tear them exactly the same way that Charlie Chaplin had done. And they all started dancing. And then as I was walking back from this meeting with Prabhupada, after telling that story, I said, what was the purpose of that story? And the devotee that I was walking with said, well, that was just to show that if you do something with enough enthusiasm, no matter how weird it is, people are going to like it. And that's exactly what happened. We started going on the streets and people thought that's weird. But they liked it. They felt entertained because we were singing, we were dancing, we were playing musical instruments. And people liked it. They still like it. Yes?
Maharaj, is it true that at that preparation, Prabhupada did some musical training, so there was synchronization amongst the...
Well, he like Indradumna Maharaj does, he does a bit, you might call it choreography, where he trains musicians and dancers to dance in a certain pattern, a kind of unity. And when Prabhupada was talking about the World Sankirtan Party, he was talking also about training them to sing properly, to dance properly, to dress properly, and so on and so forth. So it wasn't just that they would be chanting Hare Krishna on a stage, but they would be performing. And that's exactly what Indradumna Maharaj does. He has, even he does it on the streets. People are choreographed. And there was a time when I was in San Diego when there was another devotee who was leading kirtans, and we would move in a certain pattern according to his direction. And that was a type of choreography. And I think in the Brisbane Rath Yatra there was some dancing going on, and they were in unison or something like that. So anyway, there was one other thing that I wanted to mention is that when we performed at Conway Hall was very close to the Berry Place Temple. Conway Hall was in what was called, and still called, Red Lion Square, and there was a stage and theater seats and theater pillars made of the same. This is in the day when wood was at a premium, so all the pillars had the same grain, the same kind of wood as all the other pillars. And Prabhupada, before we started the kirtans, and that went on for about 4 months, he'd do a diagram of how we should configure ourselves on the stage. This will be where I will sit, and this will be where my deities will be, and this will be where the harmonium is, and this will be where the lead singer is, and you will be like this. And he made lines on a piece of paper, as the whole thing should be orderly and have a certain appearance that would impress the people watching. So it wasn't just wild kirtans, but there was a kind of method in the madness, so to speak. And we did it, and it was a success. And it all happened because Prabhupada said, well, I've been here in London for about a month now, and I'm ready to take off for some other part of the world. But if you'll get good engagements for me, I'll stay. And they got these 4-month engagements in Conway Hall with different titles, and he lectured on those things, and that was the reason he stayed there. Yes? Stand, please, and say it loudly.
What was it like to come to the point where you accepted Srila Prabhupada as a spiritual master?
Well, maybe you can turn and say that again in case someone didn't hear you.
I was wondering what it was like when Maharaj comes to the point of accepting Srila Prabhupada as a spiritual master.
Unlike a lot of people, I didn't have an epiphany. I just sort of thought it was cool that he was chanting, and he was very, very gentlemanly and very distinguished. So it took me about a year before I started thinking about a disciple spiritual master relationship, that it had to be, that. And that's what it was all about. And it like I said, it took a long time. Whereas with some people, they sort of knew from the beginning that they should enter into a spiritual master disciple relationship, and they should do it exactly what the spiritual master says, and they should regard spiritual master's instructions as being sacred and being highly realized and all that sort of thing. But with me, it took a long time.
Thank you.
Yes?
Maharaj, sometimes there's tension between those who are thinking how to make things as attractive as possible and not deter conditioned souls. Maybe some aspects of the philosophy might be off-putting to the new person. Were those who just say, no, you just purely present the message, leave it in Krishna's hands, what the reaction is.
Well,
do you have any guidance for us?
There's a big debate going on as to whether certain statements in Prabhupada's book should be changed or removed because they're politically incorrect. Like he describes women as being less intelligent, and he says a woman likes a man who is very expert at rape, and goes on and on about democracy being demon crazy, and about communists being bad, and that sort of thing. So there's a debate whether we should leave them alone and let Prabhupada speak as he speaks, or whether they should be footnoted or changed. And actually, there's a debate going on. I don't know what the exact answer is. I have my own opinions about what should be done, but it's a kind of like there's no clear answer about what should be done. That's part of the nature of the philosophy of Krishna consciousness. It's got aspects to it that some people will agree with and some people won't agree with. So I don't know. Yes?
I was just wondering, Maharaj, if you could tell us about your realizations of the power of the holy name.
The power of the holy name. What realizations? I don't have any realizations myself, but I know from what other people have said that chanting the holy name is the essence of the Krishna consciousness movement. If you attach to the name of Krishna, and it's backed up by not all of, but many Puranas and many scriptures, that this is the essence of Vaishnavism. That if you chant the name of Krishna, you will become a pure devotee. And if you become realized with tears in your eyes and the hairs of your body stand on end, and you feel that Krishna is your absolute master and Lord, even though he may be invisible from your present eyes, if you persist and you associate with devotees and you take prasadam and you go in Harinam and you worship the deities, then you'll be successful and you'll be realized. And you'll be able to go back to Godhead. Once, after a lecture, a devotee asked Prabhupada in Los Angeles, well, is it possible that we can go back to Godhead in this lifetime? And Prabhupada thought for a moment, and then from what I know, he said yes. And then as he was walking out of the room, he said, but don't take advantage. So it was kind of a yes, but maybe not answer. So we'll have to bear hunger pangs for a little longer. I don't know when prasadam is going to be ready, but unless there's some burning questions someone wants to ask, I think we'll end right now. Thank you. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.